Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Scott Horton, who's a professor at Columbia's Law School and is a contributing editor at Harper's in Legal Affairs and National Security. He serves on the American branch of the International Law Association and has represented a variety of journalists and whistleblowers. Welcome to Background Briefing, Scott Horton.
Great to be with you, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us, and I take it you have read most of the 1,000 pages that came out from the Senate Intelligence Committee. Frankly, it is pretty amazing that the conservatives and the Trumpsters on that committee, like Tom Cotton and John Cornyn, signed off on it, but apparently they did. Richard Burr, of course, was the chair, but he's sort of had to step down because of some trades that he made that are very suspicious. And I could take it that Marco Rubio was stepping in as the interim Republican chair with Mark Warner, the Democrat, as the co-chair. So obviously Rubio has tried to say, oh, there's nothing in this report that says that there was collusion between Trump and the Russians. But in fact, everything in the report says that. At least that's my reading. What's your reading of it?
My reading is the same as yours. I have to say, having read it, that I think Marco Rubio must have a different understanding of the meaning of the word collusion from most normal English speakers, because, in fact, in the 1,000 pages here, heavily footnoted, small type, really documented at every single point with affidavits and interviews and documents and so forth. What it presents is a very densely woven narrative of collusion. And it does that at many, many different levels. But certainly, I think particularly the opening chapters dealing extensively with the president's campaign chair, Paul Manafort, presents an overt case of direct collusion with an officer of the Russian intelligence service named Konstantin Kilimnik. And that's not the only strand here. You know, we also go to Roger Stone, Jeremy Corsi, Wikileaks, and many, many other pieces.
Well, you're talking about people who have been pardoned by Trump in the form of Stone. And then, of course, you've got Manafort in his mansion on Long Island with an ankle bracelet. He got let out of jail on the basis of COVID. He's not feeling any pain. And his relationships with the Russians and other crooks in former Soviet republics go way back. I mean, well before Trump, don't they?
Well, exactly. I mean, I'd say they're independent of Trump. So, in fact, I think you get a far more negative, far darker view of Paul Manafort presented in this document than you had in the Miller report, which, of course, gave us only sketchy stories that accepted frequently claims by Manafort that clearly weren't truthful. In this case, it really tends to situate Manafort right in the center of a Russian intelligence operation, which is being directed in part by Oleg Deripaska, who was the man for whom Paul Manafort was working for many, many years.
Well, it was more than that, Scott. He was on the hook to Deripaska. He'd borrowed, $30 million? Because, you know, we all know about Manafort's lifestyle of spending thousands and thousands of dollars in Beverly Hills in men's stores, etc. And my understanding is that it was pretty straightforward. That we know that Deripaska is close to Putin. He's one of the oligarchs that the Kremlin uses as cutouts to do their business abroad. So you get the guy hooked on money. You know he's greedy. He owes you $30 million. You've already killed at least 43 people in the aluminum walls. So you're a scary guy. So no little wonder that Manafort was afraid of him, wasn't he?
And I think that's exactly right. So the relationship between Manafort and Deripaska is very complex, and it involves their joint engagement in a large number of transactions in which Manafort was acting for Deripaska. And it also involves, as you note, financial accommodation, very substantial sums of money being paid on non-commercial terms to Manafort. And where Manafort clearly understood, this was not like dealing with a bank. This was like dealing with a loan shark or a mobster. And, you turn them the wrong way, you fail to make payments, and that could cost you a limb, an arm, a finger, or your life. And that's clearly in the background here from the beginning, and that explains a lot of his reach over backwards to accommodate Deripaska conduct during the campaign.
And is there any evidence, I've heard this, but I just wanted to see whether you've heard it too, that in effect it was the Russians who introduced Trump to Manafort being their guy, and Kilimnik, of course, with the GRU, he was Manafort's deputy doing all of his business in Ukraine prior to him becoming Trump's campaign manager. The idea that he became Trump's campaign manager is so incredibly coincidental. I wonder whether the Russians suggested it or arranged it, or how do we know how Trump and Manafort came together?
Well, we know at this point, actually, that there are about 3 or 4 different narratives of how this happened. And that fact in itself is very, very suspicious. But we know that Manafort himself says, that it was his idea and that he volunteered to run the campaign for Trump and to do it for free. And we know that this is something he discussed with the GRU officer and with Deripaska before he did it, with the idea that this is something he could do and he could offer them. So it was from the outset clear, even in Manafort's own account, that he's doing this, he's running the campaign because he can help his Russian intelligence friends.
And again, I'm speaking with Scott Horton, who's a professor at Columbia Law School and is a contributing editor at Harper's in Legal Affairs and National Security. He serves on the American branch of the International Law Association and has represented a variety of journalists and whistleblowers. But the bottom line here is that Manafort was the key witness, or would have been the key witness in the Mueller report. And Mueller was never able to crack him. If he had his deputy, of course, who supplied obviously a lot of information, but he could never get Manafort to rat out Trump. And Trump, of course, will reward him, no doubt, as he rewarded Stone. So isn't that the real story here, is that Manafort fell on his sword for Trump, and had he cooperated with Mueller, Trump would have already been impeached?
Well, I think it's a combination of 2 things. I mean, first of all, we have to say this is speculation because, of course, we don't really know subjectively what was going on in Manafort's mind throughout this entire period. But it seems to me clearly that he never fully crossed the threshold to cooperation with Mueller, and that he either withheld information or he was untruthful about the core dealings with Trump relating to the campaign, and whether that was motivated by a desire to protect Trump or fear of the consequences to him if he double-crossed his Russian masters on this is unclear. But I think the 2 things are obviously intertwined, because the Russians clearly were supporting Trump. They wanted to maintain him, and they didn't want their operation to provide useful ammunition against him or bring him down. So that's the tension, the field of tension in which he was operating.
And of course, the report, this 1,000-page report from the Senate Intelligence Committee, shows the many meetings that took place, Jared Kushner being one who met in the cigar shop with Kilimnik and Manafort, and it was also at the other meeting when the one that was arranged by the Agalerovs and their sleazy little British guy who put the meeting together. I mean, these people, you cannot believe the kind of lowlifes that have come around. I mean, Manafort was one of the most despicable lowlifes in Washington. He was the guy that dealt with every sleazy third world dictator from Mobutu and Zaire to Marcos in the Philippines, you name it. he was as dirty as they come. So has anybody ever really pulled back and pointed this out? I mean, even this report, this 1,000-page report, it's just like a bunch of sleazy gangsters we're talking about, combined with people like Carter Page, who are just idiots and amateurs, who clearly the Russians were trying to recruit.
Yeah, the closest we've got to that so far is Franklin Foer's piece in The Atlantic, in which he profiled at pretty great length Manafort before he was launched in these campaign activities, and his long history of working for sweatshop owners, dictators, mass murderers, and so forth. I think he was well known in Washington as someone who could bring his incredibly potent influence within the GOP to bear for anybody for the right sum of money. And he used, his relationships and his business as a way to recruit prominent Republicans as well. He did that constantly. So, no one should be too surprised by Manafort in all of this. And I think, we've got a situation today where, as you point out, he's out free. He's wearing an ankle bracelet. He's in his home, his mansion in Long Island. But he actually didn't meet the criteria for release, unlike Michael Cohen. So we've got, in this case, William Barr and the Justice Department bending over backwards to let him out. So the accommodations being cut for him are tremendous.
So how can Barr continue this charade with Durham of investigating the investigators after, I don't know that he's going to read this report, but my God, what kind of lunacy is this, that somehow or other the investigators are at fault here and that Trump, I think Barr basically said the whole thing was a hoax. He's repeating Trump's mantra, isn't he?
That's exactly right. You're making a point here that very few people have made so far. That is, who stands to be hugely embarrassed by this report and reviewing it? Well, amongst other people, William P. Barr, because they explicitly refute almost every single claim he makes, and they marshal an immense amount of evidence and documents to do so. And let's take the case of Carter Page. I think an awful lot of what he has said and done and how he's deployed Durham has had to do with Carter Page, the idea that this poor man was horribly repressed and mistreated, and that he was gone after and spied upon when no cause existed for that. And here they review the evidence surrounding Carter Page and come to very clear conclusions. This is unanimous, including all the Republicans, that basically the FBI and the Justice Department would have been seriously remiss had they failed to investigate Carter Page, given all the things he was doing and all the people he was meeting with and the things he was saying and the communications he was having. They all indicated something was seriously foul. They don't conclude that he was an asset of Russian intelligence. They don't conclude he was an agent, but they do list an awful lot of facts showing that there was good reason to be extremely suspicious of what he's doing, and those suspicions have not been dispelled to this day.
Yeah, he kept showing up in Russia. They had intercepts of him with Russian spies who were subsequently booted out of the country. And in the intercepts of the Russian spies talking about Carter Page, they talk about trying to recruit this guy and saying what an idiot he is and how greedy he is. My God, what more evidence do you want?
I think that's the bottom line here, is that he dearly wanted to be an agent or an asset for Russian intelligence. And Russian intelligence concluded he was just too stupid to serve their purposes.
So let's turn to some of the other stuff that's going to really give Bill Barr heartburn, and that is references to the Steele dossier, where they, to some extent, buttress some of the stuff that's in the Steele dossier while at the same time saying it's unreliable. And the salacious stuff is so hilarious that Trump went to Moscow in 1996 to look for building sites for his hotel. And of course, remember, the first visit to Moscow was 87, on July the 4th of 87, where he was promised a Trump Tower in Moscow. And they've been dangling this ever since to keep him on the hook, the Russians. So he shows up again in 1996. There he is, arm in arm with Miss Moscow, who spent the night with him. And then he goes to a meeting with the mayor of Moscow, who wanted nothing to do with him, by the way. And he shows up with two young hookers that he spent the night with. It's unbelievable.
I think that's right. I mean, and I would say, too, this points to what strikes me as the bizarre internal tension of this report right now. So on one side, it goes out of its way to be critical of the FBI for their acceptance of the Steele dossier. The indication is Steele really wasn't that reliable. He shouldn't have been given so much credence. There was a lot of time and energy wasted on it. So that's there. And then on the other hand, we come to these passages beginning about 640 to about 700, which might be the most salacious material ever to appear in a Senate committee report. That covers the grounds you cover, which basically says, all of the most heavily attacked aspects of the Steele dossier were well-founded. They find lots of independent sources saying the same thing, a great deal of collateral evidence for it. So they don't make final conclusions about any of this. But they do repeat an awful lot of the evidence, and they do indicate that this evidence is credible evidence. So I guess the conclusion that they do draw from this is that, going back to the 1980s, there clearly was a Russian intelligence operation running that focused on Donald Trump and included an aspect that was aimed at collecting compromat on Trump. And a large part of that was entertaining Trump in many different ways, including with young women who were largely had the confidence of the Russian intelligence services. And to me, the most amazing thing is, you have the account of the tapes, which appear over and over and over again here, from which we see it several tapes. And the question becomes at the end is, well, which of a large number of incidents would have been covered by those tapes?
Right. You can make a movie out of all
of
of the Trump honey traps, because he, as I say, they started in 1987. And remember, of course, Putin rose to power because he helped out the Yeltsin family, because they were also damn corrupt, and the family were ridiculously corrupt and taking money from all kinds of sleaze bags. And in order to help out the Yeltsins, Putin arranged to catch the prosecutor general in a honey trap, which then was shown on Russian TV. And then, of course, Putin gets a promotion as the head of the FSB, the SVR, from Yeltsin. So what I'm told is that Putin was both the arsonist and the fire brigade. He ingratiated himself with Yeltsin, pretended to the Americans that he was a reformer, bailed out, got Yeltsin off the hook for all of his corruption, and then ends up running the country. And, the KGB never went away. That's the real story.
Yes, I think one thing we should add to that is that if you look at, what branch of the KGB did Putin work for during the period he was assigned to head the office in Dresden, amongst other things, it was probably the same branch that would have been running this sort of operation that was being run against Trump. So I think we don't know that he was involved in the operation in the 80s, for instance, or earlier in the 1990s. But I think we do know that he would have known the people who were involved and were running the operation, and he certainly would have known about it.
Right. Well, the second chief director was really running the place. The first chief director at Foreign Intelligence were kind of window dressing.
Yes.
So what do you think then, just in closing here, Scott? Again, this is so explosive. I mean, everybody should read it, particularly idiots on the American left who somehow keep talking about Russiagate. And then you've got all the Republican enablers who used to be the Cold Warriors and the anti-Soviets and the red haters and red baiters. Now they're all, I don't know whether they're all on Deripaska's payroll like apparently Mitch McConnell is, but What's the likely fallout, do you think?
It's really difficult to say because, this comes as a distinct sideshow right now. We're going into the final months of a presidential campaign. I think a presidential campaign in which the Democrats seem to have made the tactical decision that this is not going to be in the center of the campaign they're running. So the chances that it simply gets forgotten or swept aside for the moment are significant. But later, after the election, I think there's going to be, when there is a change in the administration, there's going to be some burrowing down into many of the allegations that are raised here and some action. And I think, for instance, you talked about our friends on the left, the Glenn Greenwalds, for instance, the Matt Taibbi's. They're brought into this largely through the WikiLeaks connection. And, there are clear conclusions and evidence offered up here about WikiLeaks as well. So, for instance, it makes very clear that, WikiLeaks obtained all the tapes from Russian intelligence. WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, fully understood that he was dealing with Russian intelligence throughout this period, and clearly was also taking instruction from them about what to do and benefited financially from them. So that's the conclusion that's laid out here. And I think that's, rather difficult for people who burrowed in and defended Julian Assange and his involvement and all of this. And I think rather difficult for Julian Assange, too.
Well, yeah, if your hero ends up being a Russian whore, that's the problem with a lot of journalists. They get invested in stories and in their narrative, and they just simply can't open their minds to the possibilities that there's a whole other story there.
Did they fall into a Russian intelligence operation? And I think the answer here is yes, they did.
Well, Scott Horton, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Great to be with you, and good luck.
Thank you. And again, I've been speaking with Scott Horton, who's a professor at Columbia Law School and is a contributing editor at Harper's in Legal Affairs and National Security. He serves on the American branch of the International Law Association and has represented a variety of journalists and whistleblowers. We're going to take a brief station break. We're back speaking with Kristen Clark, who last night filed a lawsuit against Postmaster General DeJoy and the U.S. Postal Service to stop DeJoy and Trump from further weaponizing the USPS against Americans' need to vote.